So I'm Dr. Robyn Mildon. I'm the Director of Knowledge Exchange and Implementation at the Parenting Research Centre. For the last sort of 5 or 6 years, all my work's been in applying the science and practice of implementation. I am was the co-chair of Australia's first implementation science conference that we had in Melbourne last year. Good to see you're all there. I'm the co-chair of the next one, which will be in Sydney next year, which Gabriel very kindly is on our program committee for. I am also on the one of the practice group facilitators for the Global Implementation Conference, which we had our first one in Washington 3 years ago and another one we just had recently. So the fun thing I get to do is all things trying to understand and apply the science of implementation in a practical way through a number of projects we do, both for government, non-government agencies. We do a lot of policy work now, and I get to teach a little bit at Melbourne University, which is fun. So I went through every single poster, and what my job was to do is try and link what I could see with implementation science as we talk about it. And to help try and have that conversation with you, I thought I'd just give you a quick rundown on what I'm talking about when we say implementation science. And luckily there's references, so it's not just me saying it, because that would be awkward. And then I made a very interesting attempt at trying to draw across the presentation, so I'm going to try and do that a little bit of justice, and then it's over to you. I want to compliment Gabriel for inviting not me, but someone who can talk to this conference, because I think it's really important that we try and do a little bit of this. All right, so very quickly, when we're talking about implementation, we're generally talking about a field of practice that's been emerging through the acknowledgement that what we know in terms of empirically supported interventions in practice aren't hitting the ground and getting the impact you can see in clinical studies, okay? And when I'm talking about it, I'm talking mainly in child welfare, child protection, family support, early childhood, parenting, that kind of field, okay? But there's a lot of similarities I see in other work that we do. So we're talking about the planned and intentional use of strategies to put into practice, sorry for the acronym EIP, which is empirically supported interventions. Implementation is a process, not an event, and should be distinguished from just making a decision to do something. So we're really clear that just deciding to adapt a particular intervention, practice or program is not the same as doing good implementation work. You've just decided to do it. So implementation science then is the study of methods to promote the integration of research findings, evidence into health, education, human services. So you're going to see Dr. Dean Fixon talk in the morning, and I'm going to, and I get to rub shoulders a little bit with him, which is fun. And what he's going to talk about when he talks about implementation science is the difference between letting it happen, letting it happen, helping it happen, and making it happen. So when we're talking about implementation, we're talking about purposeful and proactive use of implementation practice and science to make it happen. And I'm going to reflect a little bit on what I saw in the slides about how often I saw the making it happen bit. Okay? The other thing I want you to think about, so that's a little bit of the definition of implementation science. The next piece I'd like you to think about is to help people apply the science of implementation. There's been an emergence of frameworks. Now just think of frameworks. There's a lot of conceptual models. Conceptual models, there's been some amazing researchers who've sat in a room with thousands of people and they've come up with all the facilitators and barriers they can see may impact on whether or not something gets the impact in the real world it's intended to do. So I'm going to pick out a researcher called Greg Ahrens in the US. Fantastic, fantastic researcher. I'm very affected by some of his work on conceptual modeling of what facilitates and impacts implementation of child welfare setting. But I'm not for this piece, I'm not talking about conceptual models, because they're things that need to be tested. Frameworks are more the actions and behaviours that you would do collectively in a group to drive or make it happen, whatever it is that you're trying to make happen. And I want to just point out three. Myers article is actually 2012 now, and Dean's going to talk about it tomorrow. There are over 27 frameworks that have been published in the literature across health, education and child welfare. The cool thing that the Quality Implementation Framework did is they synthesized them all into one nice tidy package. Very nice piece of work, very worth looking at, and now they're testing these pieces. And I'm going to just show you a little bit about that because a lot of the slides I saw looked a little similar to me to the QIF. Also, Dean's going to talk about the National Implementation Research Network and the synthesis they've done, and I wanted to highlight another framework, Getting to Outcomes, which was similar to some work that I got to sit in on when I arrived this morning. So just quickly, just think about this when I get to the posters. The QIF runs in phases. Everything in implementation, everybody loves a phase. Everything runs in phases. We all love them. QIF has 4 phases. All implementation frameworks start with a phase about getting ready. They call it getting the host setting ready. Some people call it getting the setting ready. Doesn't matter. I also noticed there was a lot of getting ready frameworks in your posters. Then there's often creating some sort of structure for implementation, and then you're starting to drive and use processes to drive that implementation through. This one I wanted to highlight because you had a lot of circles. I'm being a bit facetious. There's an enormous amount of circular diagrams in the posters. In implementation science, we like that too. We like processes that wrap around interventions to support the full and effective implementation of them. So you just don't lob it to a setting and just kind of cross your fingers and hope it's going to be okay. That's hoping it happens. That's from some work of Professor Abe Wandersman, and I think there might be some colleagues of his here maybe. I also wanted to show you this amazing thing. The most controversial thing in implementation science at the moment is the tension between fidelity and adaptation. Greg Ahrens has come up with this nice little model, which is about a planned process for trying to facilitate this work. Now, what I saw a lot in the presentations was very similar attempts, because this is implementation science in the area that we read a lot in, attempting to work in complex environments, okay, in complex systems. So let me get to, this is that prompt of the timer is very effective. Let me talk about a few posters that I saw, and I'm just put headings up here to prompt myself. I tried to look for every mention of implementation science in the poster. Our colleague here, Caroline Finch, certainly did, and did a really nice piece, I think, around how you got the British Medical Journal of Sports Science to at least pay some sort of attention to dissemination and implementation, and prior to the special issue, only 1% of papers that have been published had any kind of, were coming out of what we'd call clinical research into dissemination implementation. Hats off. That's poster 738. Are you getting them up now? We could do cruise through on the computer. I also noticed that Helen Cameron from the National Preventative Health Research Strategy, there was sort of a framework there that talked about building blocks for collaboration and integration, and one of the blocks was a supportive system. And in that system, they actually mentioned the use of program evaluation and implementation science and research infrastructure. I'd take it a little further and say the use of implementation science and practice across all of the 4 building blocks in that really nice presentation, 633. Gabrielle does a really nice job in 524. It's like an auction. Where she talked about the 3 domains of I2S, and one of them was making it happen, really nice to see, where we were talking about providing integrated research support for policy and practice. I wanted to then highlight this use of frameworks a little bit more. Because in one particular piece that I looked at, poster 614, which is by McCalman et al., was a case study for supporting embracing the relatedness to transfer and implement an Aboriginal wellbeing program across Australia. Now, I'm pretty lucky to get to do a lot of implementation science work in the NT, and I was out in Wadair just on Wednesday, invited by the elders, and we're doing some really nice transfer of implementation science principles out there to see if we can embed a few things around a program around child neglect. What I really liked about this piece was it took, rather than often the program or practice focus that we take, it took the kind of concept of empowerment, right, and embracing relatedness, and again use these phases that you would move through. So things can't be shoved, they take time. And I think somebody was talking about the workshop today, there was a bit of a worry about how long it took to fill in or complete some of the outcome stuff. Stuff takes time. In fact, you're going to hear Dean say that to fully implement anything through the synthesis work that he's done, and our practice can account for that, 2 to 4 years in any system. It takes time. It's one of the hardest things, the hardest communication jobs we have with policymakers is to discuss that. The other point I wanted to make about interdisciplinary work was the notion of implementation teams has really risen in implementation science, and there was an enormous amount of posters I noticed talking about interdisciplinary collaboration and collaboration. And in fact, someone I noticed this morning said, look, we've been talking about this for years, when are we going to really deal with this? We find one of the things I think implementation science has to offer is a very structured way for collaborating in an interdisciplinary way. There's really nice science emerging now about the effectiveness of teams, teaming structures. Teams need to be made up of roles that represent the system. Roles that represent the system. So you're mirroring the system you're trying to impact in the implementation teams, and they represent the level in which the system that you're impacting. I think that has something to offer in some of the challenges that you were talking about. The second thing I think it has to offer is the nice tidy concept of a what. So people sometimes come and ask me, can you come and do that implementation science thing you do with us? And it's very difficult to collaborate without some sort of what or agreed knowledge or something that you're working on together. And I noticed an enormous amount of the posters were front-ending that translation work we talk about. Well, when we talk about implementation science, we talk about then taking that and using frameworks and approaches to make it happen. But I wanted to highlight poster 632, Alex Colley and colleagues who I do know, I'm not sure if they're here. And they do a nice kind of three-step, is implementation like baking bread. And I thought, oh my God, it'll never be like baking bread. But they, in their ingredient 3, the intangibles that really make it work, have a little look at that and think about some of the translation research that some of you are doing, because I think they're saying exactly the same thing. I'm going to stop. You're going to tackle me, aren't you? Oh, no. I would like to stop that now. Stop it all. So we're going to move it out to the group, I think, and I hope that wasn't too quick, and I didn't want to, I really appreciated and felt a little inadequate at the tour we've got of the education slides before, but I thought I could try and bridge. So let's bridge together. Bridge.
Thank you. So we've got about 10 minutes for discussion and comments. We haven't got any questions or comments from online participants. So if you have any, please send them in now. Please, Gabriel.
Thanks very much, Gabriel Bammer. I'd like to hear a discussion between the transdisciplinarians in the room and the implementation scientists in the room, because I think those two communities don't talk to each other. I might be wrong, but I'd really like to hear how you think about these, because you're doing the same sort of stuff, and I'd really like to hear that. So what did you make of the transdisciplinary posters that were on about co-production of knowledge? Yes. And the way that they think about it, and how does that relate to what you do? And then hopefully some other people.
And I'm also going to, I just acknowledge Caroline's in the room, who can also do an equally, if not better job of what I'm about to say here. I have to, and I should have admitted this first off, I had a really hard time understanding a lot of the material. And it's no disrespect to anyone, but it was very dense, very, very dense stuff. And hopefully I'm smart enough to work my way around a bunch of things. In saying that, I worked pretty hard at, because Gabrielle had given me a hint that she was interested in our thoughts on this. And one of the things I did see is a lot of the way that implementation science is evolving is taking the context into account first, whereas before we were seen as a way to just get evidence-based programs out, and now it's much more complicated than that. So the similarities I saw with some of the posters there around this co-creation is all work we do in implementation starts with teaming structures first, and starts with that co-creation for outcomes. So it's very outcome-driven. And it's very much around, sometimes we do practice profiles, sometimes we do co-production of materials. It needs to have a strong empirically supported base to it, and we do need to hit at some competencies sometimes, but it's important that we are able to build people's competence up to do that. So I saw an enormous amount of similarities. The only difference I saw really was and it might have been the content area of the presentations I saw, where health often has a bit of there's a what already there. Like, you know, whereas in child welfare parenting, or the area that some of us work in, we have very untidy interventions, or interventions that are not supported by very strong evidence. So we often have to kind of work around that, and the way we've found that has been really helpful, and that goes very much to the keynotes that have been here today, and the workshop I sat in is focus on outcomes, and then do that kind of co-creation together. Does anybody else want to?
Any comments? Yes, please. The lady.
Liz Bolton from the Fenner School at ANU. Possibly, I was just wondering what your thoughts are about how much implementation science is different from just basic 101 project management in, like, for example, building a house. You get a plumber to do the plumbing, an electrician to do the electricity, and so on, and an architect does that role. And, you know, the basic principle of the right person for the right job. And, you know, there's a massive body of research in the whole, you know, using business development managers and that whole organisational behaviour and so on. So how much do you tap into that existing knowledge, and how similar is it, do you think, to the work that's been done in the, I guess, the business management field?
People ask that a lot, actually, or ask if I'm an organisational change consultant. I know the previous research, particularly of the synthesis work, the National Implementation Research Network, they went outside their normal content areas to agriculture, particularly agriculture, medicine, business. I will say there are similarities in terms of probably the construction of the intervention, right? And kind of sometimes the house thing's a good way, ground up. Everybody, all the disciplines need to muck in, everybody needs to get on the plan. I think, and one of the criticisms of implementation science coming through, which is not so much from health, but more in the area that I focus on, is the lack of data. And Dean's going to show a little bit of data tomorrow, but it's far more complex because it's verging into systems. So most of the work I do now, I can have teams working at different levels, co-constructing interventions to fit the context, but without dealing with the system, the interventions won't reach the families anyway, no matter how good it is, and no matter what components of implementation science that agency sets up to kind of embed it. I could give you case study after case study of case study of just the system and all levels of it getting in the way of that happening. So I feel it's a bit of that, but it's like that, you know, and that's the bit is harder, and that's where really the work you guys do have an enormous amount for us to bring into what we're doing.
Thank you. We've got one comment from online audience. Caroline, please.
Okay. First of all, I just want to pass my own comment and just say that, like Robyn too, I saw potential for a lot of overlap, if not the consistent terminology to start with. And I think that we are talking a lot about the same things, which is fantastic. And this question comes from Megan Roberts, and it's a really good way to link probably this discussion in the previous one anyway. And she asks, what are the credentials for interdisciplinarians? And particularly if we're talking about perhaps looking at implementation science versus the transdisciplinarity, it picks up those issues even further. So she says that she thinks there might be one, and it might be ANU's Bachelor of Interdisciplinary Studies, and she comments too that its strength is in its flexibility.
Yeah.
So could we expand on that flexibility and improve the discipline?
Yeah. Would other people like to comment on that? I don't want to. I mean, yes, the beauty of what we do is the flexibility is enormous, but it also takes a certain level of skill and knowledge to be able to be that flexible around particular things. There is talk of a global implementation university at the moment. I don't know what level they're talking at, but I did hear that recently at the Global Implementation Conference. But, I mean, there's such scope. I think people in academic institutions would have more to say about that than I would. We'd like some more training to be developed because we're training people on the run a little bit. Gabriel, do you want to? No?
Anyone wants to comment on? No?
Well, you can train people when you like. Yes, you do.
Otherwise they can't hear you online.
Well, just a cynical comment here. You can train people all you like. Once they get out the other end, there's no research field codes to describe interdisciplinary research. You know, you can't really get jobs, you can't publish in decent journals, you know, or you have to publish outside of your own field.
Sure.
There's, you know, there's a lot of systems, if you like, or system factors that are against it.
Again, I'm going to point Caroline, and I wish there were some other people here who I think have made some inroads to deal with in terms of being in the system, but still being able to publish and have more of an impact in traditional areas. I luckily got out of academia, so I don't have to do that anymore. My job is to try and make it happen, I suppose. But there are people here who've made some inroads there.
So we have next comment from Jenny.
Jenny Stewart from UNSW Canberra. I come from a policy studies kind of background, and we've been wrestling with the notion of implementation for a very long time. And I'm kind of puzzled why you call what you do implementation science rather than implementation strategy or implementation framework.
Because we had to give ourselves our own name to make it different from you. No.
Yeah, but
do you know, I also get that a lot. Let's just get some things out in the open. It's okay. Look, in fact, it was the health folks, and you can blame the Journal of Implementation Science for this one. I'm sorry if you're online. As I tried to kind of preface before, implementation practice is the act of doing and using processes that we've learnt from research to get the benefits in the real world that we've seen in clinical settings, if you like. And the science of that is studying that process. I think and I mean, again, some of the more academic people here might talk about the history a little bit longer. My understanding is the term implementation science grew out of needing a place to publish and talk about this, the process of moving things from clinical settings to the real world to policy to get socially valid impact for people that we are all paid to serve. And so I think it was a little bit about trying to create a bit of a movement. And now it has its own legitimate. I think in the Netherlands, I've met some professors of implementation science now. So yeah. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Thank you. So we got the last comment from the lady at the back, please.
Hi, my name is Catherine Gordon. I'm a student undergraduate here at ANU at the moment. I'm just curious how you managed to get from hoping to happen to making it happen when it continually feels as if you're stuck in the hoping it's going to happen stage. In terms of sort of that leap of faith, particularly I'm a sociology student, and so it's continually dealing with that intangible aspect and having to wait for it. And it's also linked to the comment earlier made by the gentleman about people my age being brought up to learn conflict resolution, and that we're not seeing that, but having to wait for the fact that till my generation is actually able to get into positions where we can actually make these decisions. So it's that matter of time frame. I'm just wondering how you sort of keep the team going.
Well, because the very cool thing about implementation science and the practice of it is that there are these frameworks I sort of hinted at that Dean will talk about more, and that you know, Russ Glasgow uses some of them. Greg Ahrens has developed another one. There's not just Dean's stuff. Is that, because we used to do hope it. Like, I used to train and go, come on, when I was a psychologist, come on, just do it like that, please. You know. And that was like, and then we used to like discuss it a lot and try and translate it better, and then sort of hope that was gonna, you know, but really, I mean, how ridiculous. So there are practices and processes and ways that are available in the field of implementation science to help make it happen, and it's a process. So if I was doing it, I'd want you to be able to see what I was doing. It's also the concept of teams being focused and accountable groups to the implementation of something for good outcome. It's the concept of collaborating and everybody knowing the same thing and watching the power imbalances. We've actually operationalized what are the skills and behaviours in implementation teams that makes it easier for people to collaborate, because we think collaboration has so much power behind it, and there's always power in the room, and there's always that you need to name some stuff, but you need to know what it looks like. So there's lots to help, so that when we say make it happen, it's not even people in powerful positions making it happen. It's the way you use these frameworks, the way you use teaming structures, and there's lots of examples of this happening. And we've got pretty good data coming out of our centre to show how these things are having an effect.
Yeah, we probably need another 2 hours for discussion, but time is up. So I'd like to thank Dr. Robyn Mildon for guiding us to the poster. Thank you.
Thanks.
I also would like to thank our moderator, Caroline Finch, for the questions from online participants. And I would like to thank for the interesting discussions from the participants who are here and those who participate online. Thank you very much.